94.3. 94.3 WYBC, the rhythm of the city. I am Wanda Coppage here with you on the electric drum, another Sunday evening. I do hope your Sunday is going well. I am so excited to speak to this beautiful woman here with me today in the studio, especially with it being Women's History Month, because
That's
she
right.
is definitely here making history. Her name is Dr. Sherene Mason. She's the Assistant Professor of Pediatrics at UCONN School of Medicine and some other great things that she has going on that we'll get into. But first, let's welcome her. Dr. Mason, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Wanda. Thank you for inviting me to be your guest. I'm really excited about this opportunity, especially in Women's History Month.
Absolutely. I'm excited to talk to you. So let's just throw the first thing out there. You are the first woman
Mhm.
of the African diaspora and Jamaican heritage. She's from Jamaica. We'll get into that.
Yeah.
Hold a chair at Connecticut Children's Medical Center. Yes.
Yes. And the first chair
Congratulations.
in the nephrology division as well.
Wow. Congratulations to you. But as I mentioned, you are born and raised in Jamaica. You did not come here until the early 90s.
Mhm.
So tell us a little bit about growing up in Jamaica.
Yeah, so I grew up in a working class family in Jamaica, and I would say part of my family expanded beyond my parents to include other community members and other family members, so uncles, aunts who helped to raise my brother and I. So small family with my father, my mother, and then I have an older brother who's 2 years older than me. So working class family where my mom is an elementary school teacher back at home in Jamaica. My dad was a fireman as
Okay.
well. So blue collar working class family, growing up in Jamaica, um, with just a simple story in terms of just starting out in life. And then, some of that story changed and shifted a little bit when my mom migrated to the United States. And then I became what most Caribbean people know as a barrel kid, meaning that we were with other extended family members. And, you get that barrel that came down from the States with some goodies in it, supporting you in terms of some of your things that you need as you were growing up.
Nice. So the whole family, the entire family moved from Jamaica to the United States.
Actually, we did it a little bit at a time. So my mom was here first, and my
Okay.
brother and I remained in Jamaica for a number of years before we were able to come up, and my dad remained in Jamaica afterwards.
Okay. And which
Yeah.
part of Jamaica?
Kingston. And it's
King-
not because everybody else say they're from Kingston. It's because I am actually
We're
from
actually
Kingston,
from Kingston.
right? Because most people say everybody says Kingston. No different from Atlanta, Georgia. Everybody say they're from Atlanta. But
Right.
yes, I am from Kingston.
Nice. Now, may I ask why the United States? Why the choice to move here for your parents?
Yeah, I think for my mom, who is the one who really is the parent that made the move, wanted a better life. She also had her brother and his family who was already here. I think they started out initially in New York and then eventually ultimately made it to Connecticut and Bridgeport, Connecticut to be specific. And so my mom was here before, and it was again, I think, in retrospect, think about historical context of Jamaica at the time. In the 70s, there was a lot of political turmoil. There's different party factions that were going on. Bob Marley was involved in trying to bring peace around
Yeah.
that time. And so a lot of that spurred a lot of Jamaicans in the 70s to move and migrate to either Canada, UK, or the US. And so she was also part of that transition, in addition to just wanting to have a better life and more resources for her family and her kids.
And when your mom moved here first, and your brother and your father remained in Jamaica, what type of employment did she gain when she came here?
Yeah, from what I understood, because it goes back to not wanting to have some of the conversations about the difficulties and challenges in this country.
Which is
What I
why I
could
asked that.
glean, yeah, what I could glean, and it's more when I became an adult, I had more of awareness because I was 6 when she left, and my
Mhm.
brother was 8.
Oh,
So
okay.
not having that awareness initially of what was going on, but her job had to do with being more homemaker in different communities throughout Connecticut, and in New York. I'm helping to provide homemaking assistance to family members of well means.
Okay.
So that was primarily the jobs. So because it's different when you're educated person in Jamaica and then come into the States, there are requirements that prevent you from resuming that career right away.
I
So she had
understand.
to eventually go back to school to eventually get her PhD later on in life, but much later on in life.
Okay. But so your mom also has her PhD.
Yeah, she has her PhD in theology. Yeah, so
Nice.
yeah. So she's a
So
doctor in a different way, but still a doctor. Yeah,
still a
Dr.
doctor,
Theology.
absolutely. So what age were you and your brother when you arrived here in the States?
Yeah, we were much older. So instead of being 6 and 8, we were 17 and 19 respectively.
Okay. So
Built
you,
a
when
number
you
of years.
arrived, you were on your way straight into college.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, so the way how the educational system is set up in the Caribbean and most Caribbean countries, and especially particularly Jamaica, because Jamaica is used to be under the old British system, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm.
what happens is you can start high school way earlier than the traditional age here in the States. So I
Okay.
started high school at 11 and graduated at 16. So I was pretty much done with high school. And then once you're finished with high school, there are 2 more years that you can matriculate into within the high school system to allow you to then get into college. So I was in that journey of those last 2 years when I came here in the middle of winter, in the middle of the cold winter from hot Jamaica. That was one of the
Exactly.
biggest things. Because it was a couple of days before Christmas. So cold winter weather, and then continue my journey in high school to be able to get into college. So I actually went to Bridgeport Central High School for about a year
Oh,
to be
okay.
able to identify resources to be able to make that transition to college in a different system. Because in Jamaica, it's a different system. So you would have to do 2 years of those formative high school years, the 5 years of high school, 2 additional years, and then you matriculate into the university if you stayed in the Caribbean.
Okay. And when you arrived here, before you were in high school, did you know, or when did it hit you, I want to go to medical school, and then you ended up at UConn? Was that known when you got here, or did you make the decision once you were in high school?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to be a doctor. The one thing I didn't know is what was the process of going about doing that. I knew college was part of that process, but the how to and the mechanism to do that didn't really have those roadmaps to start with. But
Okay.
knowing that definitely college was definitely a pathway to get there. And so that when I was much younger, that was where my journey began in terms of thinking about medicine as a career.
Mhm.
And I always told the story. It's not because I knew anybody who was in a medical field, not a nurse, not a doctor, never saw a doctor, never had a pediatrician. So
Wow.
yeah, so it was interesting when I reflect back on, why, and there were shared similarities with colleagues of mine and friends of mine in the same high school system in Jamaica that felt the same way about being a physician, but not really having that exposure as you
Mhm.
would think it would happen in the States. And so it was more a combination of identifying that niche for things I already love to do. So things like community service and engagement in community service and caring for others and doing for others, even as a little girl. And then my love for science. Absolutely love science, is where everybody ran the opposite direction. Science was my love, no matter what science it was.
That
So
it
that,
always strikes me when
yeah,
someone said, "I love science." Like,
yeah.
really?
I'm a big math nerd. Most people don't realize that I love math.
Wonderful.
Jamaica would say, I can do maths. We call it I know how to do maths. So I
Okay.
love math. Yeah. So
It's
arithmetic, the British way, arithmetic.
so you took those passions
Mhm,
early and decided, like, I know this is the field that I wanna go into, which is going to be medicine.
mhm,
What was the process deciding which school to attend when you were at Bridgeport in high
mhm.
school? What was that process like for you?
Yeah, so part of the considerations about where I would be even thinking about going had to do with money, right?
Mm,
Because we didn't come from a family of means, and then trying to figure out the know-hows. And also, that was within 2 years of me arriving from Jamaica here. So I definitely didn't want to explore at that time and go to California or anywhere out of the state where I'm just getting familiar with the culture and just being in a whole new country.
mhm.
So I knew it was going to be somewhere in Connecticut. Wherever I was going to go is somewhere in Connecticut. I heard
Okay.
about Yale. Didn't hear about UConn at the time, but eventually learned about UConn, which is where I ended up going.
Mhm,
And then I think I also was applying to Quinnipiac. And again, part of that was just really asking around with the guidance counselors at school about what options are available to me in Connecticut, because that was the one opportunity I had coming here and going back to high school for an additional year, was identifying those resources and knowing how to and getting that roadmap and identifying where I would fit in and where's the money.
yeah,
Right.
where's the money? Exactly.
Where am I gonna get the money? Because I know my mom and I talked about, my brother actually, interesting story, when we both came, within a year or so, he went into the military. So
Okay.
he's has an army career. And so he left and went to Missouri for basic training, and that was it. He was gone for the military. And so that was what my mom knew as a means for financial aid at the time for going to college. So she said, "Why don't you go in the military?" And I said, I don't have anything against going to the mill, but that's not my journey and that's not my story. That's my brother's
Right.
story. That's somebody else's story. And so having the opportunity to have the guidance counselor in high school I was able to start navigating how to identify resources for financial aid, get in scholarships, and also which school would be the fit for what I was looking
Nice.
for.
Dr. Mason, and if you're just tuning in, I'm speaking to Dr. Sherene Mason. You're poking at a lot of the questions that I was going to ask you anyway, because what you just said was a part of my package of questions. When
Hmm.
you transitioned from Jamaica to America, did your mom say you need to have a plan before you get here, or what is the plan for both you and your brother when you arrived? Did she speak that to you, or did you just kind of
Yeah.
already know?
Yeah, you know, we didn't really explicitly speak that out loud until when we got to that juncture where I was starting to think about college because of the guidance counseling I was getting. So up to that point, I think what my mom did know is that I was a very stellar student, and that had to
Hmm.
do with my report cards from back in Jamaica. So she kind of knew that educational attainment was a big deal for me. My brother was interested in education, but more he is more technical. So in Jamaica, his high school that he went to was a technical high school. So he
Okay.
knew he was along that pathway. In my high school, in the last 2 years, there was a focus on the sciences. So I think just understanding where that educational background came from, she kind of had an idea that I was going along a collegiate career into a tertiary institution rather than diverging into a different pathway. And
Nice.
so, even though we didn't really have like sit down serious conversations, the only type of conversation was when I started saying, I'm going to college. And she said, where are we going to get that money?
Mhm. I
And so that was
understand.
the crux of it.
Okay. And speaking of school, what would you say? What was the biggest difference that you noticed in the school systems versus from Jamaica versus America?
Yeah, I think, you know what, to be honest, one of the biggest culture shock for me was understanding that there was an opportunity for young teenagers who were mothers to be able to
Mhm.
still go to school and have a space where there was daycare in the school system. That was way different from Jamaica. My experience, and I went to an all girls school. It was an all girl public school, so it
Okay.
wasn't a parochial school, but it was an all girl public school, and
Okay.
our rules were pretty strict. Where if someone was suspected of having teenage pregnancy, that would end their school career. So
Mm.
coming here and realizing that the potential and the opportunities didn't end someone's career and process, and there was support and infrastructure available for anyone who has had that experience was a big eye opener for me because that was an experience when I was growing up in Jamaica. And, you know, I've had friends who had to leave school
Wow.
because of those experiences and there was no other resources for them. And so that was a big shift for me too as well. And then even the rigor of the classes and how to go about testing and SAT. I knew about SAT and I heard about it in Jamaica, but there's not a lot of when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of standardized test taking that we were doing. It was a
Okay.
lot of, there wasn't a lot of scientific calculator because I couldn't afford one. So,
Oh,
so,
wow.
my husband laughed at me because I usually say, I know how to do tangent, cosine, sine with SOHCAHTOA. And he's like, what is SOHCAHTOA? It's like, I had to memorize that instead of using a, instead of using a scientific calculator to figure out how to do all those math problems.
You are the scientific calculator.
Exactly, your brain. And actually, you know what? You realize over the years, your brain is the calculator.
Exactly.
Our brains
So
are the calculator.
the next part is just much like your high school transition. What was, other than the weather, it being cold, what was the biggest culture shock from coming to America from Jamaica?
Yeah, I think the other thing had to do with just the age difference in school, right? So high school traditionally, when reflect back in Jamaica, we were babies. And then
Mm.
not only were we, right, you're starting high school at 11,
Yep.
10. Right?
Mhm.
And it's 5 years of high school, but you have to figure out a career path during that time. So even when back then I was thinking, it's like, well, when I was about 13, I made a decision because we had different pathways that led you down to home economics pathway, business pathway, or science. And there was no words of STEM back then, right? So, or
Mhm.
STEAM. It was either your business, home ec, or science was the pathway that I had experience for high school back in Jamaica. So I picked the science track. And so when I came to high school here and you didn't necessarily have to identify a track,
Yeah.
you just, that was very different for me. That was
Even
very
even going into college, there are
even
some
going to
college
college.
students, exactly, that still
Yeah,
don't
and
know.
yeah, and I've learned that lesson. I know I taught that lesson to even my patients because I take care of kids and young adults, right? And adolescents and say, to be honest with you, as an 18-year-old going to college, you really don't know what you want. And it's okay. That's what
Mhm.
the first 2 years of gen ed is supposed to do. It's
Right.
supposed to help you figure it out. Because sometimes you think everybody knows what you're supposed to do and you really don't know.
Right.
You're still
Right.
18.
Still a
So can you
baby.
imagine doing that at 11 and 12?
Exactly. Still a baby for us, and baby definitely at 11 years old. Wow. So, but you made it through high school here. You enter into UConn pre-med, and I
Mhm.
have to ask you, why the field of medical study that you chose? What made you
Yeah.
choose that path?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, even though I declared myself as a pre-med major, I still didn't know what that meant, Wanda.
Okay.
I knew, again, the ultimate goal was I knew I was going to go to medical school at that point. But knowing how to navigate what I needed to do, didn't have the right guidance at that point in college. Just knew I had to take these courses, these science courses that would get me there,
Hmm.
but didn't even know what I was really doing. And so I did choose a major in physiology. It's going to be a mouthful. Physiology and neurobiology was my major.
Okay.
And the reason why I chose a science major because I thought I had to. And later on, when I matriculated in medical school, I realized I didn't have to be a straight science major. I could have
Hmm.
done the arts, right? Because as a physician, you have to be well rounded. And no one told me that. So I didn't know, I still loved what I did. But if I knew I had all the options, I may have thought about psychology. I may have thought about something else as my baseline degree and still do my pre med courses to get into medical school to be a well rounded physician.
Wow. So who would you say was that person, or how did you come into that information? Who helped shape that for you?
Yeah. So, in terms of being in college and doing the physiology, neurobiology, the mouthful.
Yes.
So, it's considered a mouthful. That's why I usually call it PNB.
PMB. Okay, we'll use the
PNB.
short one.
So yeah, so you know what? I love the brain. And we're talking about brain is a big calculator and brain, the numerous part of brain. And I think at that time I was thinking about being a neurosurgeon. And so
Mm,
I loved brain physiology. And that's why I picked up physiology and neurobiology as my major.
wow.
And so that's kind of where I started with it.
Okay. And then what about the other part of it where you said you kind of still didn't know what that meant when you got into school to be pre-med? Was
Yeah.
there a guidance counselor or someone there that kind of walked you through and helped you along the way?
Not really. Not the first 2 years for sure. I think I didn't find out about that I needed to have a pre-med advisor and that there was one until
Hmm.
maybe my third year in college.
Okay.
And by then, in some point, it's not too late, but it's a little later than when you would want that to happen, because then you need that guidance in the very beginning to make sure you're crafting the choices of classes so that for success, one, right? Because you
Hmm.
don't want to pack in a lot of science courses, think you had to do that, and you didn't have to do it that way.
Right,
And
right.
so that early guidance to make sure I set myself up for success, I didn't have that guidance. And then the last 2 years, when I started meeting the counselor that I needed to have for a pre-med advisor, they needed to write me a letter. I needed to have a committee. Didn't know all of that till later. And so developing that relationship so that they really know me versus just met me in one meeting and write a
Of
letter
course.
that's very superficial is what we didn't want.
Right.
Right. So I had to kind of step on the gas by the time I got to my third and fourth year just to make sure that I had a robust engagement with that advisor.
So tell us about the first 2 years then. Tell us about the experience. How did you manage? How did you get from one step to the next step? Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, I loved my experience at UConn, to be honest with you. So I think it was a culture shock again,
Mhm.
transitioning. I would always joke around when I left Bridgeport, something in me said, I'm not going back. I didn't
Mhm.
say that to my mom. Didn't
You
know what
said
I
it
was
to
going to do.
yourself though.
I said
Uh-huh.
it to myself. And
Exactly.
most Jamaicans and Caribbean people will know what I'm talking about. I had a grip. A grip is a big suitcase, that leather suitcase. That's a flexible leather with a big buckle. I call it
Okay.
buckle, not a buckle that goes across a flap. And I think I brought everything I owned when I moved into my freshman year because I didn't know what I was going to do. But my goal was I was going to finish college, but I wasn't planning on going back to Bridgeport to live permanently. I
Nice.
wanted something different. And so, what that difference ended up looking like is meeting people at UConn who are like minded, including the members of my sorority. So, that's where, New Mu chapter of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated. That's where
Okay.
I met my sorority sisters, who I wasn't in the sorority at the beginning, but I met women who are like minded, who, again, going back, arcing to my early years in terms of community service, being Caribbean. Some of them were Caribbean. So there was that connection. I didn't have sisters. So that was another welcome
Yes.
experience as well. And so they helped to shape and mold me in terms of helping to provide some direction about my collegiate experience.
Mhm.
Met my husband earlier. around that time.
Really?
Yeah, in what we call the fake Jonathan back then, or the fake McDonald's back then, it was called Jonathan's. The restaurant was a fake McDonald's. Met him
Nice.
there because I was working behind the cash register at the time, and met him there. And so those, even though it was challenging the first 2 years because I really didn't have a guidepost and guideline in terms of what I was doing,
Hmm.
those surrounding community members, I would call them, in terms of my sorority sisters, friends, West India. I was a president of West Indian Association, Student Association. So being immersed, the African American Culture Center, and the support of Dr. Willina Kimson Price, all of those resources was what helped to elevate me and making sure that I was successful no matter what. And especially when it came to me finding out I was pregnant with my husband and I's son at the time, because that was between my sophomore and my junior year.
Nice. And it's funny you're mentioning that because you were saying how in Jamaica it would have been the end
Oh,
of your journey,
yeah,
your collegiate journey. So that was wonderful. We're going to get into that because I need
yeah.
to know that story as well. When you became the president of the West Indian Club,
Hmm.
was that what year was that for you in school?
So that was mostly around my second year. So like
Second
between
year.
my first, yeah, going into my second year. I was already a member of the organization and then became a president during my second year.
And when you arrived on campus, was that something that you sought out or did someone come find you and you found out this is here on campus for me? How was that experience?
Yeah. I think, what I would say would be the home for where I felt comfortable was African American Culture Center, right? Because that's where everybody convened, especially as a minority student. You
Hmm.
convene in your cultural centers where you can identify with others, and within that context, that's when you start identifying additional communities
Yes.
within, right? And that's where the West Indian Association came up. Even from a sorority level, that's where that exposure came up. In addition to some of my sorority sisters actually lived in the same dorm, and I had
Nice.
that exposure. But yeah, but I would say the core was our African American Culture Center, which that was home. Which interestingly, years later, when our son went to UConn, that was his core in his home for
He
this
went
and
to
the
UConn
same
as
mentor.
well.
Yeah, and the same mentor,
Nice.
Dr. Price, who looked out for him.
And your husband, a student at UConn, was he also pre-med?
No, so he was. I'm trying to remember what his first major was because it was before he eventually transitioned into communications. I think he did think about pre-med and then he switched to communications, and that was where his true love was.
Okay, nice. And that's what we were talking about, being able to have that space to find
Yeah,
what you really want to do.
exactly.
So
Exactly.
along the journey, you became pregnant.
Hmm.
Tell us what that was like to be able to continue. Obviously, you're successful, uh, and be pregnant in that environment. What was that like? What was it like to have to tell your mom? Was
Yeah.
that
Scared. Scary.
that's why I asked,
The
right?
Jamaican folks. So I'll be even honest with you. So yeah, it was definitely scary. The thing that did help, I had the support of my at the time was my boyfriend and
Hmm.
husband, right? Had the support, complete support from 100% from there, and that makes a difference because that's not a
Makes a
typical
difference,
story,
right?
right? He didn't run the opposite direction, right?
Especially being young and in school himself.
Exactly. And then
Yes.
we were both first generation college students. So
Nice.
again, first generation college students not having a lot of resources. And then we have the surprise, this beautiful God-given surprise, but still a surprise nonetheless.
Mhm.
But we were the type of people to say, you know what, this is what we're dealt with, and we'll figure it out, right? And we'll figure it out together. And that was our attitude about it. But it was still scary. It was really scary. It was scary because just the idea of being a mom, I wasn't even ready. Just like we talk about that 18-year-old going to college. Granted, I
Absolutely.
was 20 going on 21 at the time, but still, it was still scary.
Mhm.
Um, and then the other part is how do I take care of another mouth, right? That was scary.
Yes.
And then the unknown of what that would look like for school and my dream and college, right? And finishing college. And that was a lot of unknown. And then the biggest one was telling my parents for sure,
Mhm.
right?
But you managed what did you was it shocking? Were they supportive? What was that like?
Yeah, the reaction was what I expected in terms of disappointment for sure, right?
Okay.
Because as parents, you want, and it's not necessarily a disappointment where I felt like they weren't being supportive, but appropriately disappointed
Mhm.
because they wanted differently and they know what my dreams and goals were. And so, I think I initially wrote my mom a letter and then I called her after I knew she got the letter to see if she got the letter. And then my dad, who was actually in Jamaica at the time, I called him on the phone. And, again, disappointment, but at the same time going, are you going to be okay at the end of the day?
Yeah.
Right? Are things going to be? And I had to reassure him to say, you know what? I still don't know what I'm going to do, but it's going to work out fine. We're going to be okay.
We're gonna be
Whatever
okay.
that okay looks like, we're gonna be okay. And
Did you find employment? Did you start working and going to school?
yeah. So interestingly enough, working but more on campus. So then, we said Jamaican have 3 jobs. Got 3 jobs. We already, both my husband and our boyfriend at the time, we had jobs, but we started getting more jobs in addition to
Right.
kind of course load, right? So because our son came in October 1995. And so we found out was in the spring of 1995 that we were pregnant.
Mhm.
And so the majority of my pregnancy was during the summer. And before that year, we already had stayed. You remember I told you I had my grip and I wasn't planning on going back to
You
Bridgeport?
weren't going back.
Nope,
Exactly.
wasn't planning on going back. So every summer, what I did, and just again, support from a community, was we stayed and took classes. Even when everybody ditched the campus and stores and was gone back to their communities for the most part, stayed
Mhm.
and took 1 or 2 classes because then I could focus. This was before we knew we were going to be pregnant. Because we
Right.
know we can focus on some of the difficult classes, take 1 or 2, focus and then excel. And
Yeah.
so fast forward the summer that I was pregnant, did the same thing again and continued to do the same thing, recognizing that I couldn't go back to school that fall semester because I would be delivering a baby in the middle of the semester. But I
Mhm.
was already making plans to figure out how do I get back into school the following year in 1996. So, and I
Nice.
think part of it is that's my brain usually works that way. I'm very forward thinking. I'm already planning A, B, C, and if D doesn't work, where's E? That's
Mm.
just how I work. My brain functions even to this day. I'm already have a backup plan to the backup plan to the backup plan.
Nice.
So even if I didn't know or could completely see where the plan was going, but just at least having that
That's
mindset.
a superpower. A lot of people don't think that way.
Yeah. 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 And I think that's probably what gave me the encouragement to keep going is I saw options,
Yeah.
right? I didn't limit myself. Even when I was limited, I didn't see limits. I saw options. I said, okay, this is what I have right now in front of me. I can't do it this way, but is there another way I can do it and still accomplish the goal?
That's so
And so,
powerful.
yeah.
I know just that story alone is so inspirational to people because sometimes, especially as women, we look at when you do become
Mhm.
pregnant, things now have to shift and you can no
Yeah.
longer pursue and follow your dreams. So to see that you continue to do it with a plan and a
Yeah.
backup plan to the backup plan,
Right, right. And you know
it
what's so
can be
interesting,
done.
Wanda, is like that has helped me tremendously being a physician, right? Because if I have patients in front of me, they're like, Dr. Mason, you gave me this diagnosis. And at my rule, I usually tell my parent patients, because I take care of kids who have very sick issues, right? Kidney transplant, kidney dialysis, babies all the way up. And I said,
Mhm.
until you see Dr. Mason freaking out on the floor, you don't have permission yet to freak out. But when we're
Right.
ready to freak out, we'll freak out together because we still have option 1 we just got to. We haven't even
Mhm.
got to option 2 and 3. And I
Right.
take that same approach with being realistic in terms of how I take care of my patients. And I think that generated from back then. But yeah, but thinking about what my options and our options when we were pregnant and had our son in terms of how do we financial support end up being Medicaid, right? Welfare.
Right.
Put it in real terms. We were on welfare. We had a WIC program. We had to
Mhm.
go and, there's some embarrassment that you come with that because there's a stigma associated with it, right? Back
Yes.
then, you used to have the wad of quote unquote money in that little packet that you go to the supermarket and have to pull out the first month. It felt embarrassing, but at the same time, there was something that said to me, "This is not my end goal.
Right,
This is
right.
just a stepping point, and this is okay because this is not my end goal."
That
Right,
is
and
so
so
true.
yeah, and that I always thought that this is not if I can come to Jamaica and start all over again with new friends, new community, I'm
Mhm.
fine. I'll be okay.
Nice. And obviously you were okay. Did you find housing off
Yeah,
campus?
so this is now where my mother and I call her my mother-in-law, stepped in. So, we had this grand plan. My boyfriend slash husband, it wasn't my husband at the time, but now is my husband. We had this grand plan of, okay, so you're going to be out that semester. I'm still going to go to school my fall semester. He went to school the fall semester. He kept going. I was out for that semester. Our son came in the middle of October.
Mhm.
And then I started making plans to go back January. We were going to bring the baby back up to UConn and figure out an apartment and figure out working 10 jobs and figured. And my mother-in-law stopped us and she said, I will take care of the baby here in New Haven.
I love
You
it.
guys finish school. I will bring the baby up. And she did. She drove up to UConn stores every weekend. We had a pack and play. He stayed there for the weekend. She came back and got him. And we did that every weekend until we graduated for a year and a half later.
Shout out to
And
the
so
mother in love.
yes, yes, and she
Much
was a busy
love.
woman. She was the head of the usher board at her church. She she worked at Sikorsky. She was much older woman,
Uh, but we
but
got
she
it
was
done.
my inspiration as well when she did that. My mom is my inspiration, and she was certainly my inspiration.
Absolutely. Some strong women, and we have to band
Mhm.
together. Dr.
Exactly. What about
Sherene.
Harken to Women's History Month? Starts
Mhm.
with our core.
Absolutely. This
Mhm.
is Dr. Sherene Mason, Assistant Professor of Pediatrics at UCONN School of Medicine. So I have to, I'm probably speeding through your story.
Mhm.
You went to UConn, you graduated from UConn, you did your medicals, you furthered your medical study at UConn, and then you end up working at UConn.
Mhm. Yeah.
So you made UConn your home. You came
Yeah.
with your grip and stayed.
Yep, exactly. I did. That's a good way to see. Yes, definitely. I came with my. I can't even find that grip now. If you asked me where it is, I would never even know where it is. But yes, I did that journey with UConn undergrad medical school, where I did the dual degree, the MD, MBA, and then went to Yale for my formative training for being a resident, chief resident, and a fellow in nephrology at Yale, and then came back home to UConn.
Wow. Okay. So tell us about that process. I mean, I know there's so much to pack or
Yeah.
unpack in that story, but coming back to UConn in this position, what was that like for you?
Yeah, so starting out when I returned back to UConn in 2013, I, started as a junior faculty, meaning, I've never practiced medicine on my own without any supervision, because that's what your training is. You're doing it with supervision. So
Mhm.
this is a time to call the shot, to make a decision, but still working with your colleagues to do so. So, that was also terrifying, right? Because yes, you have support, but it's in a different way. And so, but the skill set I did get when I was training at Yale, and especially as a chief resident, I had some leadership skills and quality above and beyond just my medical knowledge that helped to transition in that perspective. And then during my journey at Connecticut Children's, in terms of rising up to the position of being the division head currently, and also the inaugural Robert R. Rosenheim Foundation Endowed Chair, had to do with allyship, mentorship, a
Okay.
combination of all of those above. And again, having my robust community outside of work, right? To uplift
Nice.
me when things are hard and difficult and challenging along the way. And my community with even my medical school, right? So I had Dr. Marja Hurley, who was at UConn School of Medicine, who's a distinguished professor and also a Jamaican woman, and also one of the first Black women to graduate from UConn Medical School, who is my mentor, right? She's the
Nice.
reason why I went to UConn Medical School with a full ride, full scholarship. And so turning to those aspects is what brought me to today where we are. My prior boss, Dr. Cynthia Silva, who was my division head at the time when I first started, pushed me to, most people don't think I'm shy, but I'm really shy. I'm very much of an introvert, and people won't believe that, but I really am.
I can understand. I can
Um, you
understand
know,
that.
exactly. I'm really an introvert. She pushed me to spaces I wasn't comfortable, right?
Mhm.
Where put me in front of people to say, no, you can do this. You can present yourself in this way. And one of those part of that journey to lead to this current state is being on the board for the hospital specialty group. So I was one of I'm actually the only um, African American woman that was on the board
What it
outside of like the executive team member.
what
You
was
know,
it like to be in that room?
it was actually interesting because so the hospital has two different boards. There's one for the main hospital, and then there's one for the specialty group of all the physicians who
Mhm.
are part of the hospital. And that was interesting because it helped. This is where my MBA came in, where it did help to I get to utilize and massage and work my MBA and have people realize that I come with an extra special talent, not just my MD.
I
I
know
come
that.
with a different set of knowledge that is a core knowledge that was helpful in that setting. And so making decisions behind the scene, understanding how the organization operate behind the scene was very helpful, especially in terms of grooming me towards this position as the division head and understanding what that takes
Mm.
was very crucial.
And then pushing you into situations where you are uncomfortable, that's what
Yes.
stretches you and helps you to
Oh,
grow.
yes, and I so believe that. I tell my residents that. I tell right now I mentor 3, 2 women who are underrepresented minority in medicine at UConn, and the same thing, I said, "You grow in being uncomfortable." So if you're
Mhm.
too comfortable, you're not gonna grow, right?
Absolutely.
And that's part of my journey. So even coming back to UConn, being a professor and going to CCMC, that was part of my journey in terms of pushing myself to be uncomfortable. Because staying at Yale, I would be comfortable. I knew how the
Right.
system works. I knew how everything worked because I was there for 7 years. I wanted to be uncomfortable in this new journey of being a physician.
Nice. And look at you now. And look at you now. As I hear your journey, your story, you have some impactful women
Oh,
that
yes.
have helped push you and place you to where you are now. How important, I just heard you say you have some mentees yourself. How
Mhm.
important or significant is it to you to provide that same guidance to young women that are coming up behind you?
Critical,
Mhm.
critical. And I see it not only for young women who are coming behind in medicine, but just in life, right? So that's part of the vital part of being in organizations like Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated. Now I'm in the grad chapter in the Greater New Haven area because we do have young women who we mentor through our Aurora program. So
Mhm.
our Aurora Club is an affiliate club for young women who are between the ages of 11 to 18. And that's where we provide a lot of mentorship, doing things in the community. So like, for example, last weekend we had our youth symposium, which is an international program that we have for youth across the country and across the world, actually internationally, on a Saturday morning in March. And so it's critical not only for, most people think about it from a career standpoint, but just for life skills and,
Right.
just general information, just to say you too can go along whatever
Absolutely.
that path is, right? It
Whatever
doesn't have
that
to be
path
medicine,
is.
but whatever that path is, even with that.
And carve your own. Carve
And
your
carve
own
your own,
path.
yes,
Mhm.
carve your own path. It doesn't have to be linear.
So, Dr. Mason, you already said that many people don't realize that you are an introvert. What would you say there? What is something else people may not know about you? Let's use this platform to discover who you are. Tell us something
Uh-huh.
that people may not know.
I I don't know how to swim. And actually the reason why I mentioned that in particular, because especially coming from an island, most people think you have to know how to swim because you live in an
You're
island
always in
that's
the
surrounded
water,
by
right?
water. Not
Mhm.
necessarily true.
Okay.
So that's one. I learned how to ski in my
Nice.
formative years, a couple of years ago, and the same thing with riding a bicycle. So that tells you something about me. I love challenges. I love to discover new things.
And being uncomfortable.
And being uncomfortable. And I realize about myself, I like challenges, but it has to be safe challenge, somewhat safe
Right, right,
challenge,
right.
but still a challenge nonetheless. So knowing how to ride a bicycle in my later years, I wouldn't even tell you how later that is, and learning how to ski was challenging because it came with fears of
Mhm.
falling, fears of failing, right? But still nonetheless trying. And that's just been the pretty much theme of my life is there is always a fear of failing, the fear of falling, but still trying nonetheless and
Nice.
not letting that stop.
And
And so
in your I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, no, no. And so those are some of the things that some people know and other people won't know about
Well,
me.
thank you for sharing it here on the Electric Drum on this platform.
Yeah.
The title of
Yeah.
first woman of African diaspora and Jamaican heritage, and you said you were the first in another position as well, correct?
Yes. So the division head for nephrology at the Children's Hospital, almost 30-year history.
What does that mean for you?
Yes. I would be, it definitely means an honor for
Mhm.
sure. It's an honor. I would be remiss in not saying it is definitely not only an honor and a privilege, but it's also weighted, right? Because, and part of the reason why I'm saying weighted, because I welcome it, but I also want to make sure I'm not the only,
Right.
right? And so that part of the weight of making sure I'm not the only and making sure I provide the opportunities for others so that I'm not the only, the first and
Nice.
the last, right?
I
That's
love
the
that
part that's
answer.
weighted.
I
Hmm.
love that. It's all about giving back, giving
Yes.
back.
Yes.
Where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? What's next for you?
Yeah. The next 5 years, personally or professionally?
Both.
Both. Personally, um, okay, so this is interesting. So this is another thing someone doesn't, most people won't know about me except for my husband and my family. So I have a vision board. And interestingly, on the vision board, I have on it a picture of myself and the Nobel Peace Prize.
Mm.
Not to say that that's where what I want, a Nobel Peace Prize, but I want to achieve higher
Mm.
and achieve higher in my field. So making, for example, professionally, making breakthroughs in what I do in meaningful, impactful work for the patients I take care of. And I'm seeing that happening a lot with our Robert R. Rosenheim Dialysis Center and being the first and being the difference. So, for example, my predecessor, Dr. Cynthia Silva, was behind the fact that we only at our hospital have the only children's hospital in the state of Connecticut with a pediatric dialysis center. It's the only one in the whole state of Connecticut, and that was her vision. And I'm
Mm.
continuing that legacy and her vision. And with continued doing that is providing opportunities for our smallest babies to get dialysis when we couldn't before. So being able to work with the Rosenheim Foundation, my new legacy is being able to acquire a dialysis machine that fits the smallest babies to be able to dialyze them and not have to send them outside of the region. And so that has
Awesome.
been the recent legacy that I started working on. Looking forward to improving our patients' lives holistically by looking at trauma informed care and really making an impact in terms of how we operate, how we take care of our patients, how we don't pass judgment, and
Yeah.
how we meet them where they are and see them where they are. So that's part of that journey as well that I'm undertaking. Personally, I would love to travel and do new things. Again, I like to challenge myself in a safe way. I always say
Yes. In a safe way.
in a safe way. Um, but being able to see more than the typical, in the beginning, I started out where I went and traveled to the islands. I want to see more of the world
Mhm.
because I think part of seeing the world is what has made me to where I am, and knowing that there's of options, knowing
Yes.
that there are possibilities right out there is one of the biggest things that has opened my eyes. Even just moving to this country and come in and see that there's options and possibilities, open my eyes to new ventures.
Do you get
And
to go back home often?
I do. Oh, absolutely. I have to. You know what? You know what I realized last year after COVID, I hadn't been back home for a little bit. And last year I went home back to Kingston,
Mhm.
right in the middle of Kingston,
Yes,
in
she's
the
from
middle of Kingston, not
Kingston.
the resort. And what I realized when I went home, because things were stressful last year,
Yeah.
just working with very sick kids in the middle of a COVID pandemic, different things, and making the transition in a new role, I felt grounded.
Mm.
When I came back home, I remember my little self. And it just dawned on me. I remember the little Sherene and the dreams and the hopes. So, irrespective of all the difficulties and challenge,
Yeah.
going back to the core of who I am was very helpful to help me move forward. So, I realized I need to go home at least once a year to
Yes.
center myself
To be rooted, exactly,
and to
that's
be
where it
rooted
all
and
started.
centered.
That's where it started. I love it. And what about children? You have your son in school. Did you have
Yeah.
more children?
No, so we have the one I call it one and done.
One
So,
and
one and
done.
done.
No, that's
So
okay.
yes, our I should say little Isaac, he's not little anymore. He's almost 28-year-old man and making his own way, forging
Nice.
his own way in puppetry arts. He was the only Black puppeteer student at UConn
I
during his
love
4 years.
it.
So he's in the city actually doing big things, doing murals around the community, bringing communities together. Grand Avenue, there's a mural with his collective on the wall, bringing the two communities across New Haven together to work on those murals. So he's doing a lot. Isaac Bloodworth, he's an artist in the area.
Nice.
Um,
What's his name? Isaac, what's the last name?
Bloodworth.
Loveworth. Okay.
Yeah,
We can reach
yes,
out to him too, maybe get an
yeah. So
electrical
he's a
engineer.
spectacular young man, and we're so proud of him because again, we had him in college, and 20 years later to the date we graduated. My husband and I graduated. He graduated from UConn himself. He
Nice.
was at our graduation when he was a year and a half old, and then 20 years later we were at his graduation back at UConn in
That's
2017.
such a beautiful
So it was
story.
a full
I
circle
love
moment
this.
for us.
I'm so happy I got a chance to speak to you today. This is Dr. Sherene Mason. If people want to just connect with you, not
Mhm,
necessarily for anything medically related, just to
mhm.
connect with you because you're such a whole vibe.
Thank you, and
How
thanks for the opportunity.
how can someone reach out to you?
Yeah. So I'm trying to figure out the best way so I don't have people reach out medically. And you know what, to be honest with you, so I'm a member of a different number of different organizations in the area. So for example, if you go on the Iota Chi Sigma chapter of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated, which is our local chapter,
Mhm.
you'll be able to find a ways to get in hold of me that way through our chapter email. I'm also a member of the Greater New Haven Links Incorporated. So
Nice.
that's another way to get in hold of me. In on Read to Grow, I'm a board member of a Read to Grow, which is a literacy board here in Greater New Haven as well. So I'm not that hard to find at
Because
all.
that's what I was thinking. You would make a great keynote speaker. You are inspiring. So I'm pretty certain someone's going to reach out to you because you're a
I'm sure
wonderful
they will.
person.
I have something lined up for April already with another speaking engagement. So
Yeah.
I'm sure
Okay.
that will happen at some point. Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. I looked up and saw what time it was on the clock. That's why I said, "Oh my goodness, there's so much to talk about on
Yes.
the
Yes.
Western time."
I have my grip to unpack.
This has been Dr. Sherene Mason, wonderful person to speak to, especially in the month of March, Women's History Month. She's making history, continuing to make history. Her legacy will not be forgotten. She's doing big things. Any last words before we wrap up?
I also want to just highlight this month is also National Kidney Month. So as
Okay.
much as it's National Women's Month, because I'm a kidney doctor,
Hmm.
and that is important. And I think one of the main message I want to send for this month is, especially for our communities, our Black and Brown communities, we are so impacted by kidney disease and dialysis need and needing for transplants. Or organ donation is critical, which I will be talking about next month.
Okay.
Um, and knowing that there's over 850 million men and women worldwide who are living with kidney disease because it's a silent killer and they don't know it. And so my takeaway is really go to your doctor routinely for your annual exams, whether you're a child or an adult. Get your blood pressure checked, get your urine checked. Health is your wealth.
Yes. And I don't want to, but I do want to squeeze this in. Can you give us any tips for preventative care to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves?
Yes, I would definitely say a big part is definitely go to your annual exams. Do your annual exam, even if you quote unquote feel fine. Annual exams, drink an adequate amount of water. That would be part for kidney, but in general, and listen to your body, right? Because most often our body tells us something is going on and we don't listen to it. But your annual preventative care is crucial.
Okay. Okay. That's coming from Dr. Sherene Mason. And we thank you so much for your time today and taking the moment to be here with us for the drum.
Thank you again, Wanda, for inviting me. I really appreciate the opportunity to do so.
Absolutely. This
Have
has been the Electric Drum on the Rhythm of the City, 94.3 WYBC. Please come back next Sunday. We'll have another great guest, another great conversation. And yes, if you missed any part of this conversation, I will be posting the video sometime this week. So just check on my Facebook page for that. All right. Keep it locked. More great music is still to come. You have the Sunday flashback Sunday after this, more R&B. Be well, and I'll talk to you again on Monday.